Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Graney. President Biden unveils his multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan today. We have details on what's in it and how he proposes to pay for it. German car maker shocks the world by changing its name, stock price shoots up, but was it only a joke? And are kids apps on the Google Play Store collecting your kids' personal data without your consent? Two advocacy groups are asking the FTC to investigate. That and much more coming up at NTD Business. We have full details and analysis this evening on President Biden's new multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan. The president says the goal is to improve the nation's infrastructure and transition to renewable energy. But at what cost? To begin, NTD's Colin Fredrickson has details of the bill.
President Joe Biden is unveiling his $2 trillion infrastructure plan on Wednesday. The White House touting the plan ahead of Biden's announcement.
And this is about creating jobs now. It's also about investing in industries of the future.
Beyond aiming to fix roads and bridges, the sweeping plan also features an expansive climate change and social welfare agenda. The plan calls for $621 billion to rebuild the nation's transportation infrastructure like roads, bridges, and public transportation. That includes a $174 billion investment in the electric vehicle market. Biden's plan also proposes $400 billion to care for the elderly and people with disabilities, another $213 billion for building and retrofitting affordable and sustainable homes. There's also money to boost American manufacturing, research, and development, as well as workforce development. For now, Biden is sparing wealthier Americans from any tax increases. The plan doesn't include raising the top marginal income tax rate or changes to the capital gains tax. Instead, it'll put corporate America on the hook, raising the corporate tax rate to 28%.
The president's proposing a way to pay for his historic investments, reforming, making the corporate tax code more fair.
It also proposes closing loopholes in the tax code that allow companies to move profits overseas. Rollout of the plan sets the stage for the next partisan clash in Congress. Lawmakers mostly agree that capital investments are needed, but differ on the total size and inclusion of programs traditionally seen as social welfare programs. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
Vance Ginn over at the conservative Texas Public Policy Foundation says it will actually cost the American taxpayer $3 to $4 trillion, not $2 trillion when you look at the details. Ginn spent some time in the White House as an associate director at the Office of Management and Budget, so naturally he's a little concerned about the cost of the package and how we're going to pay for it. Biden plans to raise the corporate tax from 21% to 28%, but Ginn says that will cost the country thousands of jobs. But will it really? Ask Ginn, how does he know that for sure?
Well, I think we know it from history. We know it from economic theory. We know that if you raise taxes, you get less of whatever it is that you raise that tax on. In this case, it's corporate income taxes. And what corporations, what businesses do is just pass that higher cost along to us in the form of higher prices, lower wages, and fewer jobs. So the Tax Foundation has looked at this increase in the corporate income tax rate from 21%, which is about average in the developed world, to 28%, which is one of the highest in the developed world, which the Trump administration had just cut from 35% to 21%. That they show in the Tax Foundation shows that this could lose more than 200,000 jobs. So it's not just thousands, it's hundreds of thousands of jobs that could be lost at a time whenever many people are still unemployed.
The Trump administration, though, even former President Trump talked about a lot, rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure. So is there not an argument there for a package like this?
Well, we have to be careful about what we're calling infrastructure, because whenever you look at this overall package that's being deemed as an infrastructure package, it's really filled with things like a green energy boondoggle, where you have many things that are going to green energy projects, trying to retrofit pipes and houses and things that I don't even think the federal government should be involved in, honestly, and trying to have more of a dependency role on the federal government doing things versus states and just the private sector. And then on top of that, increasing taxes to do this sort of thing is just nonsense. It's going to slow down the economic economy. It's going to mean less job creation overall and with very little infrastructure. And infrastructure ultimately should be put on mostly at the state level, right? Or for private businesses to create those jobs at a time when our economy has already been expanding and more jobs are being created overall. We don't need the federal government coming in to put more money out there when we're already running massive deficits and the federal debt is over $28 trillion, which means that everyone in the United States owes about $80,000 already to our national debt. $80,000. And it's much less putting more money into the system already, creating inflation and higher interest rates that would slow the economy.
And I believe that's 80,000 per person. I believe it's like $250,000 per taxpayer. You know, it's incredible.
That's right.
But on that point, you mentioned, I believe this bill will give more powers to the federal government to start to do these infrastructure projects. You mentioned that it should be done at the state level. Is it not an argument for, well, you do it at the federal level, you have economies of scale, you have certain bargaining powers. Well, where's the advantage to doing it at state level?
Well, I mean, you may have those sort of suggestions that are out there, but it's not like the federal government has money sitting on the side. They're already running massive deficits. The deficit expected this year after the $1.9 trillion package that they just passed. The money hasn't even rolled all the way out yet, and they're already talking about another sort of package like this infrastructure package. The federal government doesn't have money, so we're going to continue to run massive deficits. And the states have done a much better job. Places like Texas have been putting in conservative budgets that haven't increased more than the average taxpayer's ability to pay, and not running up massive deficits and putting money towards roads and transportation and the needs of the state, where the state can better align with the needs of the state compared with the federal government. The federal government doesn't know necessarily what Texas needs or what California needs. Those are different. So why not allow the states to do that instead? And we don't need more money being sent to the states, because then that's just more strings attached, right? More efforts that we don't necessarily need here in Texas, because it's a blanket one-size-fits-all policy, when oftentimes those one-size-fits-all policy fit none.
Vance Ginn, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
The plan includes more money for electric vehicles than it does for repairing and modernizing America's roads, bridges, ports, waterways, and airports. So will it really achieve the desired stimulus effect? Daniel Turner is the founder of Power the Future. It's a think tank and advocacy group for American energy workers. Asked him about the impact of the green proposals in the New Deal.
This is kind of standard of how the green energy movement operates, right? It talks about how green is the future. We need this to combat climate change, yet it's clearly not sustainable on its own. And the only reason why we're getting it is because they are passing massive tax increases on the fossil fuel industry, about $25 billion worth of new taxes, to pay for this. So if this was such a promising technology, if this had really such a great future, why does it require the force of government to actually implement it? And so, yes, there will be a lot of green energy spending. There'll be a lot of green energy programs. But this is really just the force of government shoving this down the throats of the American people, regardless of the science, regardless of the cost, or even of the efficiency of this technology itself.
We spoke before about how China can sometimes benefit from these programs. After looking at the details that we have of this infrastructure package, what will it mean for this competition between the U.S. and China?
And this is a real sticking point of this program also, because about 75% of these technologies, wind power and wind turbines, solar panels, et cetera, about 75% of them are manufactured in China. And by whom in China, we don't know, right? They have very questionable labor practices. We know they have a lot of violation of child labor laws. We know they have millions of Uyghurs in concentration camps. So not only do we question their labor practices and abuses, but it is just a fact that we are going to be importing tremendous amounts of these wind turbines and solar panels from China. So we are foregoing American energy dominance to buy products made in China. And I don't trust China with our pharmaceutical industry. I don't trust China when it comes to pollution, environmental or ocean pollution. And I certainly don't want to trust China when it comes to America's electricity needs. But that's what this administration is doing. And
is it not the case, say, we did have a big outlay on these green energy projects and we started possibly bring a lot of these manufacturing jobs back to America, start to put the infrastructure into place. They're talking about, I think, putting charging points across the country. Is there not an argument that, it could, through this package, become green America?
And I appreciate the sentiments of this, but reality is these products are not made in America. They are made predominantly overseas, the majority of them in China. I would love to see these companies like GE, which is ostensibly an American company, does a lot of its manufacturing overseas. I'd love to see GE build these plants in America. But I am very concerned about funding programs, the taxpayers funding programs on hopes and dreams. Right, we saw that for 8 years of the Obama administration, and now we're going to hope that when we dump billions and hundreds and trillions of dollars of taxpayer money, that the jobs will follow. And that's not always the case. These companies manufacture in China for a reason. They can pollute the environment. There's no OSHA. There's no labor unions. There's no environmental standards, and it's cheap to get things done. I would love to see every American job leave China and return to America, but that's not reality. And by just pouring trillions of dollars into this with the hopes that China complies and that corporations comply, I don't trust corporations much more than I trust China, to be honest. So I'm just really concerned that we're just pouring money into programs to the detriment of our sovereignty, of our financial feasibility or future, and for the energy needs of this country.
Daniel, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The number of homes on the market in the U.S. is still extremely tight. Now it's starting to have an effect on sales. Pending home sales fell over 10% last month compared to the month before. It measures the number of Americans who signed contracts to buy existing homes. Home sales were about 0.5% lower than the same time last year. Home supply is down nearly 30% from February of last year as well. And even though the 30-year fixed mortgage rate fell a little bit last week, refinance applications still went down. They're down, I think, 30% compared to this time last year. A sign of the housing market cooling off a little. Stocks, though, today rose, with S&P 500 coming close to hitting 4,000 for the first time. The Dow, though, fell 85 points, 0.26%. S&P 500 gained 14 points, 0.36%. The Nasdaq added 201 points, about 1.5%. So for the quarter, the tech-heavy Nasdaq underperformed the other two major indexes. Investors seemed to rotate from growth to value stocks during the time. 10-year Treasury yield inched up a little bit today, 1.74%. Gold recouped a lot of its losses from yesterday, rose to a little over $1,700 an ounce today. Oil went the other way, fell a little. WTI and Brent both down about 2% for the day. Shares in Nomura and Credit Suisse fell further today. It's now wiped out $9 billion from their market value so far since the two banks suffered those big losses from the blow-up of the hedge fund Archegos Capital. Both banks were slower than rivals like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs to cut their exposure to Archegos, an investment fund run by former Tiger Asia manager Bill Wong. Archegos got into trouble last week and was forced to sell its stock. Now its lenders may have to write down over $6 billion after the fund defaulted on payments. Credit Suisse shares fell nearly 20% this week. Analysts say its plans to buy back shares, pay dividends this year could be at risk. Meanwhile, Nomura warned of a $2 billion hit from the fallout, but that isn't even confirmed yet, could be higher. And make things worse, Moody's slashed Nomura's outlook to negative, citing potential deficiencies in its risk management. It looks like April Fools came a little early this year. Car maker Voltswagen sent out a message saying it will change its name to a trendier, American-sounding name. But apparently it's not happening. April Fools. NTD's Phil Zoe has the story.
Volkswagen USA electrifying the whole world into believing it had a new name, Voltswagen. Its CEO said, quote, changing out our K for a T, except it was fake news, an April Fool's Day joke.
Volkswagen taking a drastic step in this direction definitely gets them some notoriety.
Caldwell said VW sales have been slumping in America, so it makes sense if this was a marketing move.
They definitely need to get their mojo back. And if they're going to start a whole new branding campaign and try to think of themselves in that fun, playful, quirky way that they once did, then maybe this is a step in the right direction.
But not everyone agrees. A Duke University law professor said U.S. regulators should take action because misinformation can distort stock prices. Volkswagen shares rose nearly 5% on Tuesday when the bogus news came out. Back in 2015, VW was caught in the Dieselgate scandal where the carmaker admitted to cheating on emissions tests. VW has plans to sell 1 million electric vehicles by 2025. The company tweeted, "What happened? People talking about electric driving can only be a good thing." Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
Goldman Sachs is joining the crypto craze. It plans to offer its wealth management clients investments in Bitcoin and other digital assets for the second quarter. CNBC says Goldman could offer exposure to Bitcoin itself, derivatives, or through traditional investment vehicles, maybe like Bitcoin ETFs if they happen. The move comes days after a report that rival Morgan Stanley had already started offering investments in Bitcoin. Several firms have recently announced they're betting on Bitcoin as its mainstream adoption is gaining traction, it seems. Digital currency, however, remains highly volatile. Google Play Store apps are apparently gathering personal information on kids under 13 years old. The apps are labeled as teacher approved, but advocacy groups say this is misleading. NTD's Arlene Richards reports.
Advocacy groups want the FTC to investigate kids' apps in the Google Play Store, claiming they're illegally collecting personal data from children.
So what the children are doing in the games, any other information that they have about them based on where they've been before is used to then target the children with personalized data-driven advertising. And that's a violation of the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act.
The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act says you generally can't collect personal information from a child unless you have parental permission.
Parents should be in control. That's the thinking behind the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and the COPPA rule. The rule has been in place for years.
You gotta look for kids.
3 different studies found widespread violations with up to 50% of kids' apps violating the law. 2 of the apps cited in the FTC complaint include Hatchimals Collectibles and Bubble, My Virtual Pet. A Google spokesperson says Google has made more stringent requirements around ads, content, and personal data, and have labeled certain apps as teacher approved.
But they also make representations that, these apps are safe for children as well. And we don't think that violating children's privacy law qualifies as safe. So we think that Google needs to vet the apps that they're recommending to families.
The advocacy groups have successfully pushed for FTC action in the past. The FTC currently has the complaint. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
About as welcome as a cold takeout. Deliveroo shares collapsed as much as 30% today after its market debut on the London Stock Exchange. The company is backed by Amazon, but it was one of the biggest IPO fails for a major company in the London stock market for years. The float had valued the company at about $10 billion, but within minutes of the market open, Deliveroo lost over $3 billion of its value. A number of major UK fund managers said they would avoid investing in the company because they say its shareholder structure gives outsized voting rights to its founder, Will Shue. American businessman is based in the United Kingdom. Some analysts also see headwinds as cities end lockdown and people start to dine out as normal. The IPO was London's biggest in a decade. Now the disappointing open could be a blow to UK Finance Minister Rishi Sunak, who's aimed to attract more tech firms to London. And a new report says that at least 25% of France's public debt is owned by Chinese investors. Some are now worried about what influence that may give China in France's affairs. NTD's David Vivez has the story.
After castles, vineyards, and airports, Chinese investors seem to have found something else to purchase in France: public debt, According to a report published by an economic think tank, China owns at least 25% of France's public debt. For economist Philippe Erlin, this is in line with the CCP strategy to conquer Europe.
We know for sure that China is buying what it can in European countries. They bought machinery companies in Germany, wines in France. It is like a market. They take what is best in each country.
In September 2020, the French Minister of Economy and Finance said China's central bank was among the first to own France's debt. It says the pandemic, which triggered a 300% hike of France's public debt, could increase the scale of this issue. It also says the more debt China owns, the easier it will be for the CCP to influence France's politics and attitude toward China. The Minister of the Economy said in a report published this month on public debt, "We have seen countries become dependent on their creditors. And there's also another problem, according to Erlin. Forced closures of many businesses and enterprises have resulted in many of those going bankrupt, and they too are being purchased by China."
Some Chinese companies seem to have benefited from the economic crisis. In the US, we saw big tech companies benefit from the closures of small businesses. This is the same for China, which also increased its presence in Western countries. They are now able to purchase at very low cost any assets in France or in other countries, which they do.
NTD reached out to the think tank about who exactly owns the public debt. The director said she asked the same question to the Ministry of Economy, but hasn't received an answer. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And Chinese telecom company Huawei, its growth slowed dramatically in 2020 as the impact of U.S. sanctions becomes more apparent. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look at its annual report.
Huawei's growth tumbled in 2020 as US sanctions took their toll and other countries turned away from the telecom giant due to national security concerns. Huawei's 2020 revenue totaled nearly $137 billion. That's only about a 4% increase, much slower growth than 2019, which saw a 19% increase. That's a 15% drop year over year. By region, China was its biggest growth driver at more than 15%, and the Americas saw nearly a 25% drop. Profit for the company is up 3.2% to nearly $10 billion for the year. The US blacklisted Huawei on national security grounds and also cut off its chip supply, which it needs for making smartphones. The Trump administration also encouraged other countries to step away from Huawei's 5G equipment. The Biden administration is currently still holding that strong line on the matter. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Still to come. Honda recalls hundreds of thousands of vehicles around the world. It's over a defect in the fuel pump. And SpaceX announces the crew for the world's first all-civilian space mission is set to launch from the Kennedy Space Center. That and more in just a minute. Honda is recalling 628,000 vehicles in the United States. It's to replace fuel pumps that could fail and lead to engine problems. The recall covers various Honda and Acura models from 2018 to 2020. Honda says one part of the fuel pump could be defective, but it hasn't received any reports of crashes or injuries related to the issue. Honda will notify owners by mail in late May, and dealers will replace the fuel pump free of charge. Honda didn't say how much it'll cost the company, though. Universal Studios Hollywood is getting ready to reopen its doors starting in 2 weeks. The California theme park says it will resume operations April 16th. Some rides won't be available to guests because of restrictions, and the park will only be open to California residents. But the company says it's working with local health and government officials on safety procedures like physical distancing, required face coverings, and controlled capacity, the usual stuff. Commercial space travel is becoming more of a reality. That's as SpaceX prepares 4 civilians to launch into infinity and beyond. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
SpaceX has selected the final members of a one-of-a-kind crew. It plans to send them on what's been called the world's first all-civilian mission to space. The mission, dubbed Inspiration 4, will be commanded by 38-year-old billionaire philanthropist Jared Isaacman. Isaacman is the founder and CEO of Shift4 Payments.
We absolutely, hope for the day where, you've got, fishing buddies going up into space. Like, that's what this is all about, is to make, space, more affordable and therefore more accessible to everyone.
And joining him as crew members are Christopher Sombrowski, Dr. Cyan Proctor, and Haley Arsenault. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket will launch the crew aboard a Dragon spacecraft later this year. But crew members will first undergo commercial astronaut training on the Falcon 9 launch vehicle and Dragon spacecraft, which is currently attached to the International Space Station. Once the Dragon returns to Earth, the SpaceX team will inspect and refurbish it ahead of the Inspiration 4 mission. Arsenault and the crew recounted their reaction to the news of being selected during a virtual news conference.
And I remember getting off the phone and my hands were shaking. It was just so exhilarating. This is definitely not something I ever imagined would happen, but I think that's what it makes it so fun for me, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be part of this really great team.
The mission is planned for no earlier than September 15th, 2021. They'll lift off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida and will be monitored by SpaceX Mission Control. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
That looks like fun. That's the latest business updates for today. You can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, it's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.